Wake up, a morning jog, and I'm happy to be here in Lithuania. All right, so my name is Matias Skarin. I'm from Sweden. I'm a passionate software guy. My passion is to find out what is the right environment that we need to produce good things. That's what I try to find, and I find that this is an endless road which I'm traveling, and I'm going to share some of the experience I've had implementing these tools to drive and create value. And by the end, I'm going to pose a question to you, or a challenge, which is free for you to pick up and discover if that is true or not. All right. Maybe it's good if the connector is in the right computer. All right, so my view is that, and how this presentation is created is, if you are already working and you find that Agile works for you, basically find that you have left the emergency mode and you now have some type of more or less steady pace. So what are the things that we could do? And my advice and my challenge is that we can step out of developing functions and take part in creating value. And I'd like to share some of the things that we can actually do to leave our comfort zone of being just in development and taking part in creating things that are of value for people. So, first question, is this creating or destroying value? We have an idea, we move it into a time box, where we need to predict where that idea should be shipped. We rush the design, we implement it, we ship it, and a couple of sprints later we deal with quality issues. So, this is a fair question, right? For sure, time boxes have value. I mean, they make us focus and make sure that we actually deliver things. But let's say we already gained this ability to learn to deliver things. Is this still valuable? To start by asking what the date when something should be delivered, instead of asking the question, what is the right thing to deliver? So, why is this important? Well, maybe this is how we think the world works. Of course, we start with some planning, it moves forward. However, what really happens is something more like this, right? Work jumps back and forward, and if we're lucky, it comes out right. But if we understand that this is really going on, shouldn't we take a moment and step back, and before we start developing, make sure we understand what is the value that I'm creating? It's not just a text, it's this intrinsic understanding before we start designing and coding and shipping in. So, the traditional way that we've learned to start businesses, and this is how our funding works, is we first get a very impressive business case because we need a lot of funding, we build big solutions, and then, well, we hope that someone's going to need it. There's so many of these projects around, and I just had a conversation about an ID project in Scandinavia yesterday, and we have this in Sweden as well. Are there better ways to develop business? And I say, yes, there are better ways. So we can do business by learning to maximize value. And a simple way which you can discover what is the right thing that I'm developing in is by thinking of your world in this sentence. You have demand that's unvalidated. This is demand that you haven't checked if someone needs yet. What we do is that normally we codify this into user stories, which are hypotheses of stuff we think people will need. Now, out of that separates into two different boxes. We have value demand, which is demand that the customer is ready to pay for, and failure demand, which typically when we fail to deliver customer value. So examples of failure demand would be answering questions like, where's my thing? Bugs that were expected to work, not extra features, but bugs where things didn't work. And then we run through our development, and in our development, we rush things. So by that, we get feedback that says this stuff doesn't work, and that can be called false demand. So false demand, it can actually, if you are unlucky, consume a lot of your internal resources without you knowing. And I've had teams that have looked at what they were doing in each iteration, and we found out that maybe 40 to 50% of each iteration consisted of this false demand. So what's the difference between false demand and failure demand? The only difference is that this false demand is happening internally, and failure demand is happening externally. So that's when the client tells you it didn't work. Now the question is, do you need to rush? Right? So I use this in scenarios where I have teams and development organizations get pushed to do more things faster, to try to learn, should we really go faster or should we do better things? So where is the upside, really? It's a very valuable view. And if you just add percentage signs from your world, you'll see where the upsides are of your improvement. So here's an example. This is a team. Basically, it works in operations. And when I came to them, they said, "Oh, we can't accept any help because we're too busy." And I watched them for a couple of days, and they were really busy. Before, they hadn't had any visual way of seeing their world. Right? They were just moving tickets around like that. And they said, we don't have time to work as a team because we have to move things. So we put a very simple view of what was going on their wall, and we separated their board in two sections. Right? The top section here is the value-adding things that we should be doing. And the bottom section is the stuff that shouldn't be here. And guess what they found out after like 4 or 5 days? Why were they so busy? Right? Because of the stuff that shouldn't be there. That was like a aha moment for them. So they've been stressed out for years and years and years by work that shouldn't really be there. I said, that's stupid. Yeah. So what we did is we took the manager and walked over to the team in front of them that didn't complete work with good quality and that they had to redo. And we trained them in how to do that. And magically, this problem disappeared. So, an example of optimizing value, right? Not optimizing speed. So this is what we try to do. We try to figure out what is the really valuable stuff that we should be working on. And this is my challenge, that this is something that we can try to discover. And if we learn to do that, we might not need to rush it. We will still create better stuff. So you've probably seen this if you've been part of some Agile training, that most of the software that we ship, they have features that no one really wants, right? How can we do this better? Let me share an example. A couple of years ago, I went to Denmark, and I visited a guy there that works at the Danish department. And this department, Danska IT-Telestyrelsen, they're responsible for actually purchasing in software for the Danish government. So they buy software for 400 million Danish crowns every year. So they buy software. And when they analyzed the software that they bought and how it's being used, they found that 60 to 70% of all the IT projects that they bought had slippage in time or budget. So they missed the time and budget. But the interesting part is that the projects that were conceived to run well, so they hit their targets, they contain 60% not needing functionality. Now, if you are a government who invests 400 million crowns, so that's, roughly 40 million euros each year buying software, and you see this analysis, I mean, what do you think? Do you think you get good payout out of your investment? No, 400 million euros in here times 0.6 times 0.4. Hell no. We're going to change this. So they did. And what they did is they started to use Agile contracts for getting vendors to offer the software. And an interesting thing that they did to learn to pick which is the right vendor is in the beginning when they ran the contract, they take the first month out of each deal. And they have 2 vendors that can participate. And they ask the vendors to make a small increment of software during 1 month out of that project and show it to them. And the vendor that produces the best outcome, he gets the contract. The vendor who does not get the contract get paid for that month of development. So here's economic incentives for everyone to participate. And what they've learned after applying Agile contracts for 4 or 5 years now is that today their projects run almost all of them on time and budget. But more importantly, they spend equal amount of money. But even more importantly, the stuff that gets produced are much more appreciated by the people who uses this software today. So what they found is actually they could potentially terminate the project 2-3 months before the final budget has been reached. But what both the users and the developers do is use the last 3 months to optimize the experience of this software. So this is creating value, and Agile contracts being used in the real world. So I'd like to inspire you to say, this is not just stories, right? This is really happening today in the world. Now, we can also learn to use fast feedback to produce better things. And the most obvious way is, of course, to learn to use fast feedback to filter out what is the value, to go try it in small, simple ways. And this is known as lean startup, is one way to call this. But I think this can be used also in larger corporations to get fast feedback on what are the valuable ideas. And the interesting part is if we can learn to discover what are the valuable stuff before we develop the software for it, we would know that this is already value adding. That this is not just some idea that we thought would work. We will be sure because it's been proven. And imagining doing that instead of spending hundreds of hours estimating the size of the software. This is a better investment for everyone. Examples I like to share. Parrot cages. So Parrot cages was a bunch of guys that want to start a business. And how did they get going with this business? They actually checked if there was a match between Google searches and Google AdWords, because they didn't have a clue what business to start. So they found that actually people were searching for parrot cages, whereas no one was really putting ads up for selling parrot cages. So how to get going with this business? Well, first, they put an empty site up, and they started to market it. And they checked if it got traffic to this empty site, and they were seeing, yeah, they get hit on this empty site. So it took 1 day to get the site up. Then they said, well, is anyone really interested in looking at parrot cages? They put in some simple pictures of parrot cages, like buy parrot cage, and people were clicking. So within 3 days, they knew that people were clicking on that. And then with a couple of more days, they had a buy form where they say, could you please want to buy this? Unfortunately, nothing happened when you click the buy form, but people were clicking, so still works. What if we then make sure they can actually send an order? So the buy form starts sending an email for them to say, I want to purchase parrot cages. And they get to process the payment manually behind this form. And actually, this is how they started the business. This is a true lean startup story. Here's another one, Groupon. the guy that started Groupon actually started by taking his idea and printing vouchers from his home printer and making a deal with a local pizza shop and then advertising these vouchers on his newly created blog. That's how he got going, without any funds. And now they have more than 1 billion in sales. You might ask, so do we need to care? Well, I guess that there are companies that would, if you look back, said, I should have cared, right? We can call them Kodak, we can call them Nokia, right? So yes, I think we should care, because even though you have a solid market share today, there's no guarantee that that will exist in the future, because you can't predict the technology changes that will wipe out your existing structures. And unless you have a way to learn if you're doing the right things, if you have the ability to step out of your comfort zone and try new ideas, you are in very high risk that the market will shift and you won't be able to shift with it. And that would be very sad. So yes, I think we seriously should be considering to try to use these ideas to deliver value. Now, Agile represents a shift in economic thinking. So taking waterfall, where we do things in stages, trying to squeeze them together to do them more in parallel. And economic value that we get is we get faster payback. Because now we can get payback or fast feedback at an early stage instead of late. So if you take the ROI or the return on investment for a typical project, you will see that an Agile project would always be less risk and faster payback. Now, if we invest in early feedback, let's say we make sure that we try out a valuable product increment fast to learn if that was the right thing, so we can dismiss the things that are not needed. The upside we get is that we shift this payback curve to the right. So now we have even faster payback. So this is the economic argument for why Agile makes sense. And we can keep on thinking about this economic argument to invest in even earlier feedback to get faster payback. Now, but we can go even further. And I'll try to introduce 3 ways of viewing the economics of what we are doing. First, we have economy of scale. So this is the traditional way of doing business with plans, focusing on resource utilization, making sure everyone is busy, and driving down costs. And then we have economy of flow. Right? Economy of flow focusing on the time from when we get the demand until we can fulfill it. But I'll try to introduce to you a third way of optimizing value, a third economic idea, which I call product development economy, which we still are to discover how to do well. I think there are companies that are doing it well today, but I'm not sure that we are really looking at why they are performing. So, economy of flow. This is the Toyota insight. And this is Taiichi Ohno. So he actually discovered that efficiency is not about delivering things with high utilization, it's about delivering the right thing to the customer in the shortest possible time. And you see him saying this, that the whole idea, the whole economic idea behind Toyota is to make sure that we reduce the time from the customer shows up with the demand and until we can collect the cash. So all the techniques that you see have this single purpose. But we can do better. If you take your normal products and the features and you compare it to the competitors on the market, you will see that some of the features are more frequently being represented. So an interesting question is, what happens when you develop a feature which is not part of existing products out there in the market? Well, we can say that if we track the revenue or the value that we get out of that feature, if we miss, so this is the features that are that the market does not know of yet on other side. So we're driving them out from the normal herd. And we get two effects. We can either get a fail, so we get a loss because the investment failed, or we can get a win here. Now, the interesting thing about this economic trade-off is it's worth taking a couple of these to hit one of those. This means that we need to be able to take some risk in a product development. Unless we do that, we won't find the stuff with high margin. Now, the danger here, which we need to observe, is if we take our ideas and we decide we will filter them to only keep likely business cases, the stuff that are sure to succeed, guess what will happen? Right? We will drive value towards the middle because they are sure to succeed, but we will lose the economic outcome of that product. So here's an interesting question which I ask you to think about. In your world, where you work, do you have a mechanism to make sure you do the likely stuff? Or do you have a mechanism that makes sure you do the unexpected stuff? And what balance between this do you need to optimize the economic outcome? So companies that did not do this, here are a couple of examples. GM, you see the chief executive saying that for a very long time, we have successfully ignored people who want to push the boundaries with new ideas, push innovation, and we have more focusing on finance to make sure that these ideas were successful. An interesting part with GM is that they were the first company with the minivan. They were the first company with the electric car. They scrapped both projects. So this is destroying value rather than creating it. And in fact, for the electric car, they had customers that were clinging on the fence. Please give me back my car. But they were not listening. So another company that actually did it another way. So you find Rovio, and you know, of course, of their Angry Bird product. But an interesting point when they developed Angry Birds is how it got created. During that time, the company were creating a standard for good games. They were thinking, oh, the games have been successful, maybe we can codify this standard and share it with others so they also can create good games. So they created this standard, and when they did that, one of the guys there, I think it was a designer, showed up and said, hey, I created these birds and these sounds. What do you think of that? And they said, oh, this is really cool, right? We have to do this. Now, the interesting point is these new birds, they didn't meet with any criteria of the standard of a good game. But of course, they recognized it was really fun, so they pushed on, and the success is, of course, known. Now, for a management, this represents a huge leap, because we can no longer think of ourselves to only optimize cost. Right? In our world, we need to understand that we always do a trade-off between cost and flow and cost and value. And if you make a decision that only focusing on one of these, you're going to drive the other ones out. I thought someday that this was so obvious that we didn't need to talk about this, but I'm telling you, I learned that I am wrong. So the first challenge for a manager is not make a decision unless you understand the trade-off, or at least start by learning what the flow is that you're creating, or what the balance in value is, like the value demand, failure demand. Then you can start making good trade-off decisions. But we don't need to stop there. Let's ask ourselves some questions. So, are the best ideas developed? Or do they arrive from project management or product management who tells us what to do? Well, and how are you learning about the stuff that you do if that is perceived positively by the ones who are using it? And how do you get this unfiltered feedback? Of course, if you say, I don't have time to think about this, or I can't work this way, which you showed me, then ask yourself what percentage of your features are really selling. And my question that I had 2 years ago was, can development happen through multi-team scenarios successfully without project management and without product owners? And I'd like to share some of the insight I've had by thinking and trying this out to inspire you to what is possible. Now, the way that we did this in these multi-team scenarios, we created a standard for new ideas. We call them concepts. The idea was that the person who is passionate about the idea should be able to run it all the way to it works at the client. So basically, the person who is the right to run with the idea is the person who likes it, and this does not need to be contained in a specific role. So this could be a developer, this could be a customer, this can be a support guy, this could be a consultant that actually implements solutions and trains the client. Why should we limit the persons who gets to say what the good product ideas are to a single role, right? But the challenge is twofold. First, there will be no handover. That is, that if you're not willing to take your idea through development, through all the stages, no one else will do it for you. So that's the first hurdle, right? You want it, you make it happen. Second challenge, you work and you follow the idea, not until development is done and it's released, but until the customer uses it and you get the feedback if it was good, and until the customer actually likes it. Then you're done. Right, so to train these people on what are the right things they need to prepare to enter conversations with developers, we used a simple A3 with predefined sections, right? And this is a training tool to train these new people who might not been in software before to say, what are the right things I need to prepare to enter a conversation? And this is just simply to avoid that they enter a conversation with senior developers and the senior developers ask a question and they say, oh, I don't know. So make sure that they have a prepared conversation so they can have something valuable out of that. So we take this A3 and we train them to fill it in, and that is just enough information, not more, to start a conversation. Right? So see, the difference here is we're not talking about list of features. What we are talking about is that you describe the problem. That's the top section up to the right. You describe a comic of the problem that you're trying to solve for the end user, and then we engage developers in making sure we solve this problem. So we are not talking about requirements anymore. We are talking about solving problems at customers. And we are not starting development unless we understand what this problem is. So the way that we started this and why it started, because I had a problem with a team, an Agile team that was working pretty well, but the product owner was really overstressed. So the product owner was doing 3.5 persons job, and I was wondering, how the heck are we going to help this poor person? And the second question is, where is the value-adding time? Should she spend more time with development, or should she spend more time facing the customers, like learning what the customer wants? And I decided, well, we decided, to actually let her spend time out with the customers. And to do that, I needed to train a new person that were tasked to drive development on the next important feature in one day. Because I had 1 day to meet this person, and I wanted her to be prepared to talk with developers so she can drive her idea through. And that's when this idea of concepts, which is the A3, and you work with it all the way to it runs with a customer, started. So the solutions that this has helped us deliver is make sure the product owner is no longer overloaded. It helped us solve the problem of development teams not seeing the complete problem. So development teams saying, I feel like a small cog in machinery, right? I don't understand where the purpose is of what I'm doing. And we use this concept idea to share that understanding with the teams. We also use this idea to make sure that we understand value. So here's a true quote from a marketing manager who was talking about his IT department. He had multiple development teams. He said, well, I know that they do Agile, but seriously, I ask for a nice costume, and all that they deliver out is a dirty T-shirt. Now, this is not the fault of a single person. What actually goes wrong here are two things. First, do we express what the value is before we start development? And the answer was no. We list a bunch of features. So how would the developers know how to optimize value? And the second thing is, do we make sure that we understand what the developer should trade off or optimize if he reaches a constraint, like if he's out of time, or if someone is away? And what happens when multiple teams down the chain needs to make the same decision? Do we provide them guidance to what they should trade away and what they should keep, or do we just say, you make your own decision? Well, the fact is, we weren't making those trade-offs explicit, so we weren't sharing those trade-offs with every team that was building the product. By sure, when the deadline arrived, guess what happened, right? We were trading off the difficult stuff, right? The risky stuff, the stuff that had new technology. And by that, the stuff that got out, of course, it worked, but it wasn't awesome, right? So this is how we try to change that. So the scenario here for this company is to have 3 marketing units who sell business-to-business solutions. We have 4 to 5 development teams that are actively working, and then we get more development team pulled in by need. We have a change management function that puts things out in production, and the operations function. So this is the scenario where we tried out concepts and have people driving ideas through this value chain. And we also, an interesting change that we did is we employed an enterprise Kanban board across this. Now, the interesting difference by doing that was, of course, we got more conversations going, but another thing happened. We weren't pushing development teams and people into time boxes anymore. Because we were saying something is done when it is of good quality. And when it's of good quality, then we move it forward. Right? So we're using pull flow here. So we're saying there are steps here, but nothing moves forward unless it is of the right quality. So this is quite a big change to how things happened before. Before, things moved forward because it was time. Like that. So that's an interesting side note. Now, some things that you might learn, or that we learn. So here are new product ideas. These are all the new product ideas that might go into development soon. So since we had A3s with them in, we put them out on the wall. And I reviewed this. So I had a look at this 1 month after we got going. And I could actually pretty easily see that 40% of all these product ideas were missing the vital information that we had agreed on was needed to start development. So should we then start development without have this understanding? Well, we decided no. It's not value adding to start development, so we took these ideas and we gave them back to the marketing people and the people who had constructed them and said, please complete it. So we have the understanding of the vital information. And the vital information was, like, what is the impact? Like, what is the problem that we try to solve? Not tell me the feature. Tell me the problem that we're solving. And things like, what are the wow factors in this product idea? So imagine what would happen if we had started development with these ideas. So 40% of ideas going through development, Yeah, well, we discovered that don't have value late, right? Or even worse, shipping to the client. And I don't feel like paying a lot for this. So that's decreasing value. So did this stuff work? Well, we actually collected feedback by the end of the enterprise Kanban board, where we learned, so do the customer use it and like it? Or do the customer say, no, this is just old crap, right? And this is the statistics we collected. So out of 113 samples for roughly 2 years, 95% of all the product ideas that we developed in this way, so without product owners, without project managers, but with one responsible all the way down to the fact that it works with the customer, well, 95% got thumbs up. 3% got, okay, we won't ship it to the customer because we're not happy, right? So we had to rework. And 2% was shipped to the customer, where the customer said, no, this is no good, redo it. So, yeah, I'd say it works. So, so what can a concept help you with? Well, a concept, the A3 with the sections, was a tool for us to ensure that we had an idea of what the integrity of the original idea was, and we shared that along everyone in the development. But it also made sure that we had a conversation, and this is interesting, about the stuff outside IT that needed to be in place for the product to be valuable for the user. So these are some stuff like training, or making sure that there's some FIQ, or making sure that support can help out the customers. Things that we might not consider in our normal day scenario. But another interesting positive side effect of having this small concept was also to make sure that very vague product ideas got transformed into something very precise very quickly. So it made sure that we knew what the right things were to develop out of each product idea. So you might ask, so did this improve time? I'll move forward. So here's the lead time through that company by using these ideas. And here is the, you'll see a bit more in detail how the time through the product development, actually the lead time for new product ideas decreased by a factor of 2 over 1.5 years. So this stuff works, right? You let people with passion drive ideas, and you share the understanding what the valuable stuff are, and you allow them to have direct interaction with development teams. Yeah, it can happen, even in multi-team scenarios. So we do not have fully cross-functional teams across the full value chain in this company. But what is happening is that we have much frequent interaction today between business and development, and also between development and release. So we have more frequent communication, and not frequent communication about tell me to fulfill this form. It's communication about what makes this product work. So there's a big difference in what gets communicated, not only how frequent it is. So, since we have a bit lack of time, I'll try to move on. So you might ask, so what do we do with budgeting and return on investment in this case? Right? How do I share costs? Well, a couple of different options that you have in place. First, why do you put out a revenue calculation or a cost calculation? Well, because I need to do a quotation. Well, if that is true, yes, you can use estimates to do that, but you might also just make a market value quote to the customer. So not just take the cost of development, but also considering what it's worth in terms of market value. Another way you can go about it, another reason for making revenue and cost calculations in projects is I want to understand what the costs are so they can be split evenly across functions. Right? Well, you can simplify that. And you can, for example, in the previous case, we took the IT costs, and we simply said each marketing department gets to pay a third of that cost. And as an upside of doing that, they get to decide every third product idea. And by that, we didn't need to estimate costs for each product anymore, because the only interesting trade-off that we need to do, or decision, was, is this the right idea that creates value right now? And if so, we just do it. Right? No reason to spend more time estimating it. It's most world spending time learning if this is the right thing and if we can develop it. But you can also do another mechanism. You can also try another mechanism, which is you pay by the time you occupy the flow. And now, traditionally, we try to estimate the resource utilization that we get in each function. But we can switch this, and switch this from being an upfront estimate to estimate the time it takes that we consume through each function. So here is an example. Here's a development project that goes through, or actually 3 development projects that goes through development. And if the first takes 14 days, the second 15 days, and the third 45 days, we can actually split costs by comparing the portion of time that they've utilized through this. And in this example, it would mean the customer A would pay 40% of the cost, customer B 50%, etc. So what's the upside of doing this? Well, the upside of doing this is that we simplify the decision early on in the process. And the second thing, an interesting thing, is that we move decision from being upfront to when we know. And we have more time spending on doing value-adding stuff instead of figuring out how big is this feature. And the way that we solved it in our case was we made sure each market segment knew how many product ideas they had in place through development. So they were sure that every third product idea that they were developing, that they fed in, was also being developed. So they could see at any moment that they were giving the right capacity from IT. So that's the very, very simple mechanism of sharing some of the cost and making sure that these early decisions are easy. Okay, so what about my end challenge? I'll need to move through. So my end challenge is, when is the right time to do release? So we've now thought through that we need some flexibility in the early stage of product development, not just pushed into a time box. But when is the right time to actually move it out? And the notion, what I hear when I talk to managers sometimes, they say, well, yeah, the time boxes are good because there's some gold plating that goes on by the end. Right? We develop things, and then, yeah, there's gold plating, and we need to ship it out to earn the value. Oh, well, yeah, that is talking about the cost. Right? Well, are we talking about the value? So if this is a release window, and if our economic return actually looks like this, so over time we gain value in the product, is it worthwhile releasing here? Of course not. It's worthwhile releasing here. So how do we learn that? How do we learn when the right time is to release? Or I'll change the question and I'll say, what happens if we keep releasing minimum marketable features too soon to the market? Well, potentially competitors will catch up. They'll see what we're doing. Potentially customers will see, no, I don't get the full product. So yeah, it's a good idea, but I won't buy it because it's not the complete solution I need. And what are you doing then? Well, you're not optimizing the economic outcome of your product development. Now, I've had another customer, and I thought I'd had time to talk about that, but I don't. But in this customer, we had a well-working Agile team. They were shipping every third week. Things were quite okay. But then we looked at the stuff they were shipping. How was that perceived by the users? And there were and how was that perceived by the customer? And the customer said, well, yeah, it's okay stuff, but please lower the price. Right? There's cost pressure here. So we thought, maybe we can do this better. So the way that we try to address that is I gathered all the different functions, so sales, consultancy, product owners, teams, one from each function. I asked them, how do we optimize economic value? Right? So this basic, is it cost minimization that we're going to do? Is it time to market? Or is it doing new, valuable, odd things? And they discussed, and the conversation took 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, they turned to me and said, we want to optimize value. I said, okay, fine, but if that's what we're going to do, we need to think through what process that actually delivers that. And we changed things. So one thing that we changed. Before, sales were predicting the delivery date when they signed the contract. So they were saying, this will be delivered by June 30th. The change that we did was that no longer were they allowed to predict the delivery date of the project. They were only allowed to tell what quarter in the year that this was likely to come out. And what that meant for us was, since we release every 3 weeks, it means we have a flexibility of +2, 3 releases to ship the product. So how did we use that? Well, one thing I observed was that when we started to build a product, and when we were getting to the situation where it was almost releasable, that's when the good ideas started to pop up. That's when developers started to say, hey, what about this have this function? It would go from being okay to uber cool. Or the customer would say, or the customer representative would say, well, why don't we have this? But before, guess what? We said, oh, good idea. Put it in the product backlog. Right? And what are we doing? Did that ever get developed? And the answer was no. So what are we creating if we do create companies like that? We create information-destroying factories. Because the information is there, but we just decide to ignore it. Like, we're blind like that. So we said, anytime during development, and especially late in the release cycle, if someone has a great idea of how to make this product better, we just do it. We don't put it in the backlog. We don't discuss with some other function. We sit down, we do it. We implement it then and there. And yeah, the release date will move, like 1 release, or maybe sometimes even 2 releases. That's okay, because we know we have the flexibility to do that. And guess what? The products that came up were of a lot better quality and a lot better value. And we earned a better margin out of the products that we developed in this manner. So here's my challenge to you. Right? Was this just a fluke? Was this just a rare coincidence? Will you tell me, or will you say, or so I ask you to challenge yourself and maybe try and tell me, is setting the release date late, basically when we know the right things of value, and release where the product is cool, does that produce better products? And does that give us better margin? And I say, I don't know yet. But this is my quest. I'm going to try to figure this out. And I invite you to do the same. So basically, do we produce better products without time boxes? So summing up, it's valuable to create a shared ID, shared economic ID across functions, and especially about the stuff that you're trying to optimize. And by doing that, you can allow these functions to make own decisions about what should be added to a product or what should not be added to a product, and how to make trade-offs if they run into constraints. And what does that mean? We can work with less hierarchies, and we can have more fun. Right? We can take part in creating things, not just shipping small features like that. And always a good investment. Understand the value, so don't rush development unless you have this value understood. fast feedback, quality in every step, don't move bad quality forward. And if you make a decision, always say why you make this decision. Don't treat people like robots. Invite them to the reason why you make decisions. And that's my challenge and my invitation to you. And I hope you'll go and try it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matias. And does anyone have a questions? Okay.
Hello, I actually have a question with regards to approach to the customer, because I do understand this necessity of making, the product in the quality manner and so on. But how do you educate the customer to focus, of course, first of all, on quality? Because as we more or less all know, that customers focus features, time, and cost. So how do you persuade them that quality, that's what we need to work on, not the timelines, not what the features you get, but what the product in the whole?
Well, the simple example, if you never experienced this before, is you show them. So you show them by example that this can be done. If you work in a tender environment where you get a tender signed, what we've done is we put into the agreement of the tender that yes, we make the deal, right? But this, we'll give you an option in our contract, which no other supplier will. And the option says we will invite you to come with a workshop just before we start development to learn what the value-adding things are. And in this workshop, we will derive out what the problems that they are solving, that they want solved. We make sure we talk with the users and the problems that need to be solved. And if we can't get the customer to come to that, we made sure that we have people that actually can go and visit them. Right? Even if at the sign of the deal said, we know exactly what we want, we made sure we have people that go out and really, sometimes without the customer knowing, observe real users so that they bring this valuable information back. So I had some slides on that, but I didn't have time to elaborate, so we can have this conversation later, perhaps. All right, another question.
Hi. The question about delivering late and comparing to this releasing early minimum viable product. So I think that the issue is not with minimum viable product. The issue is that you release minimum viable product and then you don't continue to work on improving that. Because from my experience that sometimes when I have maybe some ideas how to make it even better, then if I still release a little bit earlier, maybe customers don't even ask about the feature, what I thought that I should still continue to work on, and they are asking about different things. So why still not release earlier and then but still continue to work on improving the minimum viable product?
So let's separate between two things. Like getting a feedback from a customer or user is valuable. And if you so the release you make is to learn to get that feedback. That is valuable. But you might decide not to release it to the market yet, because it's still just a minimal viable product. Right? It's not something you can charge good money for yet. So differentiate between these two types of decisions. Someone who buys it. By customer, I mean someone who buys it. Don't release it until it's worthwhile for them to say, wow, this is cool. Then that's the right moment.
Okay. Any other questions? No hands. So I would like to thank you, Matias.
All right, thank you.
And we have a small gift for you.
Agile tour. Where should I rub myself with this? I'm only joking. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So Matias will be here, so you feel free to ask him questions later. Yeah. And now we have